The elderly woman was all alone. But then a scruffy stray cat showed up at her door. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Eleanor's meticulously tended garden, painting the vibrant blooms in hues of gold and crimson. She knelt amongst the roses, her weathered hands gently pruning away a dead branch. A sigh escaped her lips, not from exertion, but from the quiet solitude that had become her constant companion. Since Thomas's passing 3 years ago, the house, once filled with laughter and the comforting murmur of conversation, felt vast and empty. The silence echoed the hollowness in her heart. Eleanor glanced at the window, half expecting to see Thomas peering out, a gentle smile gracing his lips. He'd always loved her garden, admiring her dedication and the way she coaxed life from the earth. Now only the occasional robin or squirrel kept her company. She missed the simple act of sharing her day with him, the quiet comfort of his presence. A flicker of movement at the edge of her vision caught her attention. A scruffy, gray tabby cat was peering through the kitchen window, its eyes wide and pleading. Eleanor recognized the cat. She'd seen it lurking around the neighborhood for weeks, a gaunt figure with matted fur and a perpetually anxious demeanor. She'd even left out a small dish of tuna on the porch a few times. But the cat was always skittish, darting away at the slightest sound. Today, however, the cat seemed more desperate. Its ribs were visible beneath its dirty fur, and its eyes held a haunting hunger. Eleanor felt a pang of sympathy. She knew what it felt like to be lonely, to yearn for connection. She rose slowly, her joints protesting with a soft creak, and went inside. The kitchen was warm and filled with the aroma of the chicken soup she'd made earlier. She found a small bowl and filled it with the broth, then added a few pieces of shredded chicken. Returning to the porch, she placed the bowl near the steps and retreated inside, watching from the window as the cat cautiously approached. It sniffed the air, its whiskers twitching, then lapped tentatively at the broth. It ate slowly, as if savoring every mouthful, its eyes constantly scanning its surroundings. Eleanor watched, her heart aching for the creature's vulnerability. She knew this cat was more than just a stray. It was a reflection of her own quiet desperation, a yearning for companionship in the vast loneliness of life. She wondered about its story, where it had come from and what hardships it had endured. Perhaps she thought they weren't so different after all. The cat finished the broth and looked up at the window, its eyes meeting Eleanor's. For a moment, they shared a silent understanding, a connection forged in the shared experience of loneliness. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, the cat darted away, disappearing into the shadows of the overgrown bushes. Eleanor sighed and went back inside, the image of the cat's pleading eyes etched in her mind. She knew she couldn't simply ignore it. Something about the scruffy stray had stirred something within her, a flicker of warmth in the cold emptiness of her days. She had a feeling their paths were destined to cross again. The following days settled into a familiar rhythm for Eleanor. Mornings were spent tending her garden. Afternoons were for quiet reading or knitting, and evenings were often filled with the gentle hum of the television, a flickering companion in the otherwise silent house. But now there was a new element to her routine. Several times a day, she'd find herself glancing out the window, searching for the gray tabby. She continued to leave food out for the cat, sometimes chicken broth, sometimes tuna, sometimes just a bit of milk. She even bought a small bag of cat treats, hoping to tempt the wary creature closer. The cat, whom she'd begun to think of as lucky, remained cautious. It would appear at unpredictable times, usually when Eleanor was inside, carefully approach the food bowl, and then vanish quickly, its tail twitching nervously. Eleanor understood. Lucky was a creature of the streets, accustomed to fending for itself, wary of human contact. Trust, she knew, would take time. One afternoon, Mrs. Peterson, Eleanor's next-door neighbor, stopped by for a visit. Mrs. Peterson was a lively woman with a warm smile and a penchant for gossip. She'd lived in the neighborhood for over 40 years and knew everyone's story. "I see you've been feeding that stray cat," Mrs. Peterson said, peering out the window at the empty food bowl. "He's a scruffy one, isn't he? Been around for ages. No one seems to know where he came from. Eleanor nodded. He seems so hungry and scared, she said. I just feel sorry for him. Mrs. Peterson chuckled. You've always had a soft spot for animals, Eleanor, she said. Remember when you took in that injured bird years ago? Nursed him back to health and then released him. You've got a good heart. Eleanor smiled faintly. I just wish I could gain his trust, she said. He's so afraid. Mrs. Peterson leaned closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. My late husband, God rest his soul, used to say the way to a cat's heart is through its stomach, she said. But you have to be patient. Don't try to force anything. Just let him come to you. Eleanor took her neighbor's words to heart. She stopped trying to approach Lucky and instead focused on making the porch a safe and welcoming space. She placed a soft blanket near the food bowl and even added a small, covered box for shelter. She continued to leave food and water out regularly, speaking softly to Lucky whenever she saw him, even though he always kept his distance. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, subtly, Lucky's behavior began to change. He started to linger a little longer at the food bowl, occasionally glancing up at Eleanor through the window. One afternoon, Eleanor was sitting on the porch swing, reading a book when Lucky appeared. He approached the food bowl cautiously, but this time, he didn't immediately dart away after finishing his meal. He sat down a few feet away, watching Eleanor with his bright green eyes. Eleanor held her breath, afraid to move and break the fragile connection. She continued reading, pretending not to notice him, but her heart was pounding in her chest. After a few minutes, Lucky lay down, curling his paws beneath him. He seemed relaxed, almost content. Eleanor couldn't believe it. He was finally starting to trust her. A small smile spread across her face. Perhaps, she thought, she wasn't so alone after all. The tentative truce between Eleanor and Lucky held for several weeks. He became a regular visitor to the porch, often napping on the blanket she'd provided or simply watching the world go by from the safety of his newfound haven. Eleanor cherished these moments, finding a quiet joy in the cat's presence. She'd talk to him softly, sharing stories about her day or reminiscing about Thomas. Lucky, in turn, would listen attentively, his green eyes fixed on her face, occasionally blinking slowly as if in understanding. Despite this growing bond, Eleanor remained concerned about Lucky's health. His fur was still matted and dull, and she suspected he had some underlying issues. She knew she needed to get him to a vet, but the thought of trapping him filled her with anxiety. She didn't want to betray his trust, to make him think she'd lured him in with kindness only to subject him to some frightening ordeal. She consulted with Mrs. Peterson, who assured her it was the right thing to do. He needs proper care, Eleanor, she said. A good vet can work wonders. And don't worry, he'll forgive you. Cats are resilient creatures. Encouraged by her neighbor's words, Eleanor borrowed a humane trap from the local animal shelter. It was a wire cage with a spring-loaded door, designed to capture animals without causing them harm. She placed the trap on the porch, near Lucky's usual feeding spot, and baited it with a piece of tuna, his absolute favorite. The first few days, Lucky eyed the trap with suspicion, circling it cautiously but never venturing inside. Eleanor felt a pang of guilt every time she saw him, knowing she was trying to trick him. She almost gave up, but the thought of him suffering kept her resolve strong. Then, one cool evening, as the sun began to set, Eleanor watched from the window as Lucky approached the porch. He seemed particularly hungry, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. He sniffed at the tuna, then glanced at the trap, his whiskers twitching. He hesitated for a moment, then, driven by his hunger, stepped inside. The door snapped shut with a soft click. Eleanor rushed outside, her heart pounding in her chest. Lucky was inside the cage, his eyes wide with fear and confusion. He paced back and forth, hissing and spitting, his earlier trust completely shattered. Eleanor felt a wave of remorse wash over her. She'd betrayed him. "It's okay, Lucky," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It's okay. I'm gonna take care of you." She covered the cage with a blanket to calm him, then carefully carried it to her car. The drive to the vet was agonizing. Lucky remained silent, huddled in the back of the cage, his body tense and trembling. Eleanor kept talking to him, reassuring him, but she could feel the distance between them growing wider with every mile. At the vet's office, Lucky was examined by Dr. Miller, a kind and gentle woman with a reassuring smile. She confirmed Eleanor's suspicions. Lucky's fur was badly matted, causing skin irritation and discomfort. He also had a minor ear infection. Dr. Miller recommended a thorough grooming and treatment for the infection. The grooming was a long and arduous process. Lucky was sedated, and Dr. Miller and her assistant carefully shaved off the matted fur, revealing raw and inflamed skin underneath. Eleanor watched, her heart breaking for the poor creature. She realized how much pain he must have been in, and how much she had underestimated the extent of his suffering. When Lucky finally woke up from the sedation, he was a different cat. He was still wary, but the fear in his eyes had softened. He seemed more comfortable, relieved to be free of the heavy, matted fur that had been weighing him down. Eleanor gently stroked his head, and he didn't pull away. A flicker of recognition, or perhaps forgiveness, passed through his green eyes. Eleanor felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps, she thought, their bond wasn't broken after all. The ride home was much quieter than the trip to the vet. Lucky, now sporting a rather patchy but much cleaner coat, sat calmly in his carrier, occasionally letting out a soft meow. Eleanor kept glancing back at him, a mix of relief and anxiety swirling within her. She'd done what she believed was best for him, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd betrayed his trust. Back at the house, Eleanor carefully placed the carrier on the porch, near Lucky's usual spot. She opened the door, expecting him to dart out, eager to reclaim his familiar territory. But he remained inside, huddled in the corner, his eyes wide and uncertain. Eleanor gently coaxed him out, but he resisted, his small body trembling. Finally, she managed to lift him out of the carrier, but he immediately scurried under the porch swing, disappearing into the shadows. Eleanor sighed. She'd hoped he'd be grateful for the care he'd received, but it seemed he was more frightened than ever. She left a bowl of food and water near his hiding place and went inside, feeling a heavy weight of disappointment. The following days were challenging. Lucky remained under the porch swing, venturing out only to eat when Eleanor was inside. He avoided her completely, hissing if she tried to approach him. Eleanor felt her heart sink. She tried to do the right thing, but it seemed she'd only made things worse. She confided in Mrs. Peterson, who offered words of comfort. "Give him time, Eleanor," she said. "He's been through a lot. It'll take time for him to adjust." But time seemed to be moving slowly. Eleanor missed the quiet companionship they'd shared before the trapping incident. She missed his soft purrs and the gentle way he'd watch her as she worked in the garden. Now, the porch felt empty and silent, a constant reminder of her failure. One evening, as Eleanor sat on the porch, watching the fireflies flicker in the twilight, she heard a soft rustling sound. She looked towards the porch swing and saw Lucky emerging from his hiding place. He moved cautiously, his body low to the ground, and approached the food bowl. He ate quickly, then glanced at Eleanor, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and longing. Eleanor held her breath, afraid to make a move. She remained perfectly still, pretending to be engrossed in the fireflies. After a few moments, Lucky finished eating and, instead of retreating back under the swing, he sat down a few feet away, watching her. Eleanor continued to sit quietly, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't want to scare him away. After a while, Lucky lay down, curling his paws beneath him. He seemed more relaxed than he had been in days. Eleanor slowly reached out her hand, offering it to him. He flinched at first, then hesitated. He sniffed her hand cautiously. Then, to Eleanor's surprise, he gently rubbed his head against her fingers. A wave of relief washed over Eleanor. He hadn't completely lost his trust in her. It was a small gesture, but it was a start. Perhaps she thought they could rebuild their bond one small step at a time. She gently stroked his head, whispering soft words of comfort. Lucky purred softly, a sound that filled Eleanor with hope. The house still felt divided, but for the first time in days, Eleanor felt a glimmer of warmth in the cold emptiness of her heart. The fragile truce between Eleanor and Lucky gradually solidified into a tentative friendship. He still remained wary, preferring the solitude of the porch swing to the warmth of Eleanor's lap. But he no longer hissed or ran away when she approached. He'd even started to greet her at the door when she returned from her errands, a soft meow echoing his welcome. Eleanor cherished these small victories, each one a testament to the slow healing of their fractured bond. One crisp autumn afternoon, as Eleanor was browsing the local farmer's market, she spotted a small, ginger kitten huddled in a cardboard box. Its eyes were wide and pleading, mirroring the look she'd seen in Lucky's eyes months ago. The sign above the box read, "Free to good home." Eleanor felt a pang of sympathy. She knew what it was like to be unwanted, to yearn for a place to belong. After a moment of hesitation, she decided to take the kitten home. The thought of introducing a new cat into the mix made her a little nervous. She wasn't sure how Lucky would react. He'd finally started to trust her, and she didn't want to jeopardize their fragile relationship. But something about the kitten's vulnerability tugged at her heartstrings. Back at the house, Eleanor carefully placed the box on the porch and opened it. The kitten, a ball of orange fluff with bright blue eyes, cautiously emerged, its tiny tail twitching nervously. It looked around, taking in its new surroundings, then let out a soft meow. Lucky, who had been napping under the porch swing, emerged, his eyes fixed on the newcomer. He approached the kitten cautiously, sniffing it tentatively. The kitten, in turn, arched its back and hissed, its tiny body puffed up in an attempt to look bigger and more intimidating. Eleanor watched, her heart pounding. She wasn't sure what to expect. Lucky had always been a solitary creature, wary of other animals. She'd never seen him interact with another cat before. For a moment, the two cats stared each other down, their bodies tense, their whiskers twitching. Then, to Eleanor's surprise, Lucky let out a soft purr. He rubbed his head against the kitten's side, a gesture of acceptance. The kitten, sensing Lucky's gentle nature, relaxed its posture and began to purr as well. Eleanor couldn't believe her eyes. Lucky, the once fearful stray, was welcoming a new member into their home. A wave of warmth spread through her chest. She'd been so worried about how he'd react, but he'd surprised her once again. The kitten, whom Eleanor named Mischief, brought a new energy to the house. Its playful antics and boundless curiosity filled the rooms with laughter, echoing the joy that had been missing since Thomas's passing. Lucky, surprisingly, seemed to enjoy Mischief's company. He'd often watch the kitten's playful antics with amusement, occasionally joining in the fun. He'd chase after Mischief's toys, batting them playfully with his paws, a sight that brought a smile to Eleanor's face. The arrival of Mischief seemed to awaken something within Lucky. He became more outgoing, more affectionate. He'd often curl up on the sofa next to Eleanor, purring contentedly as she stroked his fur. He even started to venture inside the house, exploring the rooms with a newfound confidence. Eleanor realized that Mischief had not only brought joy to her life, but had also helped Lucky to heal, to overcome his fear and embrace companionship. The house, once filled with silence and loneliness, was now alive with the sounds of purring, meowing, and playful chatter. The echoes of laughter had returned, filling Eleanor's heart with a warmth she hadn't felt in years. The warmth and joy brought by Mischief and Lucky's blossoming companionship filled Eleanor's days with a renewed sense of purpose. She found herself looking forward to each morning, eager to greet her furry companions and share her day with them. The garden, too, seemed to thrive under their watchful eyes, the vibrant blooms reflecting the blossoming happiness within Eleanor's heart. One blustery winter evening, a sudden chill swept through the house. Eleanor, wrapped in a thick cardigan, noticed Lucky was unusually lethargic. He lay curled up on his favorite spot on the rug, his breathing shallow and rapid. His usually bright green eyes were dull and unfocused. A wave of fear washed over Eleanor. She remembered the day she'd found him on the porch. His body weak and neglected. Had his past finally caught up with him? She gently touched his forehead, and he flinched, a low whimper escaping his throat. He was burning up. Eleanor's heart pounded in her chest. She knew she had to get him to the vet, but the thought of losing him, of reliving the pain of losing Thomas, was almost unbearable. She wrapped Lucky in a warm blanket and rushed him to the emergency vet clinic. The drive was a blur of fear and anxiety. She kept glancing back at Lucky, his small body trembling in the carrier. She whispered words of comfort, praying that he would be all right. At the clinic, Dr. Miller examined Lucky thoroughly. She explained that he had a severe respiratory infection, likely brought on by the cold weather and his previous neglect. Eleanor listened, her heart sinking with each word. Dr. Miller assured her that Lucky had a good chance of recovery with proper treatment, but she also warned that his previous health issues made him vulnerable. The next few days were agonizing. Lucky remained at the clinic, receiving round-the-clock care. Eleanor visited him every day, sitting by his side, stroking his fur, and whispering words of encouragement. She remembered the fear she'd felt when Thomas had been ill, the helplessness of watching him suffer. The same fear gripped her now, the fear of losing another loved one. One evening, as Eleanor sat by Lucky's bedside, she began to reminisce about Thomas. She told Lucky stories about their life together, their shared love for animals, the joy they found in simple things. She talked about the day they'd adopted their first cat, a scruffy calico named Patches, who had brought so much love and laughter into their home. As she spoke, Eleanor realized that Lucky wasn't just a cat. He was a connection to her past, a reminder of the love she'd shared with Thomas. He was a symbol of resilience, a testament to the enduring power of love and companionship. And she realized that she couldn't bear the thought of losing him. The following day, Dr. Miller called with good news. Lucky's condition had improved. He was responding well to the treatment, and his fever had subsided. Eleanor felt a wave of relief wash over her. She rushed to the clinic, eager to see him. When she arrived, Lucky was sitting up in his cage, his eyes bright and alert. He purred softly when he saw her, rubbing his head against her hand. Eleanor felt tears welling up in her eyes. He was going to be okay. He was going to come home. That evening, Eleanor brought Lucky home. He was still weak, but he was on the mend. As she settled him back in his favorite spot on the rug, she realized that the fear she'd felt had been a reminder of how much Lucky meant to her. He wasn't just a stray cat she'd taken in. He was family. He was a part of her life, a symbol of hope and healing. And she knew with absolute certainty that she would do everything in her power to protect him, to cherish him, for as long as he lived. Spring arrived, painting Eleanor's garden in a riot of color. The vibrant hues of the blooming azaleas and the fragrant scent of the lilacs filled the air, a symphony of nature's renewal. Lucky, now fully recovered, basked in the warm sunshine, his fur gleaming, his eyes bright and content. Mischief, ever the playful kitten, chased butterflies through the flower beds, his boundless energy a constant source of amusement for Eleanor. Eleanor found herself spending more time in her garden than ever before. It had become her sanctuary, a place of peace and reflection. She'd sit on her favorite bench, watching Lucky and Mischief play, their joyful presence a balm to her soul. The garden, like her heart, had blossomed, filled with life and love. One afternoon, as Eleanor was tending to her roses, she noticed Lucky watching her intently. He sat patiently, his head tilted slightly, as if he was trying to understand what she was doing. Eleanor smiled at him. "These are my roses, Lucky," she said softly. "They're my favorite, just like you." Lucky purred softly, then got up and walked towards her. He rubbed against her legs, then lay down at her feet, his eyes fixed on the roses. Eleanor gently stroked his fur, feeling a deep connection with the cat. She realized that he wasn't just watching the roses. He was watching her. He was sharing this moment with her, this quiet communion with nature. In that moment, Eleanor felt a profound sense of gratitude. She was grateful for the beauty of her garden, for the warmth of the sun, for the companionship of Lucky and Mischief. She was grateful for the life she had, the life that had been filled with love and loss, joy and sorrow, but ultimately, with hope. She looked at Lucky, his eyes filled with a quiet understanding, and she knew that he understood. He understood the unspoken language of the heart, the silent connection between two souls. He understood the healing power of nature, the solace found in simple moments of peace. Eleanor picked a perfect red rose, its velvety petals unfurling in the sunlight. She held it out to Lucky. He sniffed it cautiously, then gently nudged his head against the delicate petals. Eleanor smiled. "For you, Lucky," she whispered, "a symbol of my love and gratitude." Lucky purred softly, then lay down next to Eleanor, his body relaxed, his eyes closed. Eleanor continued to tend her roses, the scent of the blooms filling the air, the gentle hum of the bees a soothing melody. She felt a sense of peace she hadn't felt in years. The garden, once a reminder of her loneliness, had become a symbol of hope, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the healing power of love. And Lucky, the scruffy stray who had wandered into her life, had become her guardian angel, a silent companion who had shown her the way back to happiness. The years that followed were filled with a quiet contentment for Eleanor. Her garden continued to flourish, a vibrant tapestry of colors and scents, a testament to her nurturing touch. Lucky and Mischief, now inseparable companions, explored every corner of the garden, their playful antics a constant source of joy for Eleanor. Lucky, though older and a bit slower, still enjoyed basking in the sun, his purr a deep rumble of contentment. Mischief, ever the energetic one, kept him young at heart, their playful chases and gentle tussles a reminder of the enduring bond they shared. Eleanor, too, had embraced the rhythm of her life, finding solace in the simple routines of her days. She'd wake early, greet her furry companions, and then head out to her garden, where she'd spend hours tending to her flowers, her hands gently nurturing the life that bloomed around her. She'd often talk to Lucky and Mischief as she worked, sharing her thoughts and memories, their silent presence a comforting reassurance. One warm summer evening, as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the garden, Eleanor sat on her porch swing, Lucky curled up in her lap, Mischief nestled at her feet. She gently stroked Lucky's fur, feeling the soft rhythm of his purr vibrating through her hand. She looked out at her garden, bathed in the golden light of the setting sun, and a wave of gratitude washed over her. She thought about Thomas, her beloved husband, and the life they'd shared. She missed him dearly, but the pain of his absence had softened over time, replaced by a gentle ache of love and remembrance. She knew that he would be happy to see her now, surrounded by the beauty of her garden, her heart filled with love and joy. She thought about Lucky, the scruffy stray who had wandered into her life, a mirror of her own loneliness, a symbol of hope and healing. He had shown her the power of resilience, the transformative power of love and companionship. He had filled the empty spaces in her heart, reminding her that even in the darkest of times, there is always light to be found. She thought about Mischief, the playful kitten who had brought laughter back into her home, a catalyst for Lucky's transformation, a reminder of the joy that life had to offer. He had taught her the importance of embracing the present moment, of finding joy in the simple things. As she sat there, surrounded by the warmth of her garden, the gentle purring of Lucky, and the soft presence of Mischief, Eleanor felt a profound sense of peace. Her life had been filled with loss and sorrow, but it had also been filled with love and joy. And in that moment, she realized that the symphony of purrs surrounding her was a testament to the enduring power of love, the healing balm that had mended her broken heart and filled her life with a quiet, enduring happiness. She closed her eyes, listening to the gentle rhythm of life, the symphony of purrs that echoed the love in her heart. She was home. The family searched everywhere for their cat, but what they found under the willow tree, the late afternoon sun, filtered through a tapestry of crimson and gold, cast long shadows across the living room floor. Rusty, a ginger cat of venerable age, lay curled in his favorite spot, a worn, faded armchair strategically placed near the fireplace. His fur, once a vibrant blaze of orange, was now softened with streaks of white, like frost on autumn leaves. He was 17, a grand old age for a cat, and the years were beginning to leave their mark. He shifted slightly, a low rumble of a purr vibrating in his chest, though it was weaker than it used to be. His amber eyes, still bright but clouded with the film of age, followed the slow dance of dust motes in the sunbeams. He watched, with a contemplative stillness, as a single scarlet maple leaf detached itself from the branch outside the window and spiraled down to the ground. The miller's house, a cozy two-story clapboard in the quiet town of Oak Haven, Ohio, was filled with the comforting scent of apple pie baking in the oven. Mary Miller, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, hummed softly as she worked in the kitchen. Her husband, George, sat in his recliner, reading glasses perched on his nose, a newspaper spread across his lap. The quiet ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway was the only other sound. "He's sleeping a lot more these days, isn't he?" Mary said, her voice gentle, as she glanced at Rusty. George lowered his newspaper. "He is. Old age catching up, I suppose. Vet said it's to be expected." Their vet, Dr. Evans, had given Rusty a thorough checkup a few weeks ago. The diagnosis was what they had feared: chronic kidney disease, a common ailment in older cats. There was no cure, only management. Special food, medication, and lots of love and comfort. "He still purrs when I brush him, though," Mary said, a small smile touching her lips. "That's a good sign, right?" "Always a good sign," George agreed. He folded his newspaper and got up, walking over to the armchair. He gently stroked Rusty's head, his fingers tracing the familiar contours of his skull. The cat responded with a faint, almost inaudible purr. Their daughter, Sarah, arrived a short while later, her cheeks flushed from the crisp autumn air. She was a vibrant woman in her early 30s, with her mother's kind eyes and her father's easy smile. She lived in a nearby city but visited her parents every weekend, a routine that had become even more important since Rusty's diagnosis. "How's my favorite old man?" she asked, kneeling beside the armchair and scratching Rusty behind the ears. He leaned into her touch, his purr momentarily strengthening. "He's been quiet today," Sarah observed, noticing the subtle changes in his demeanor. "Less interested in his food." "He picked at it a little," Mary said, coming out of the kitchen with a plate of warm apple pie. "But not much." The evening passed quietly. They ate dinner, talked, and watched a bit of television. Rusty remained in his armchair, his eyes half closed, seemingly oblivious to the activity around him. But as the night deepened, and the house grew still, he became more alert. He watched the falling leaves outside, their swirling descent a silent ballet of endings. There was a deep, almost knowing look in his eyes, a sense of resignation that mirrored the season's melancholic beauty. The aroma of freshly baked bread wafted through the house, a scent that always stirred a particular memory in George's mind. He was in the kitchen, making sandwiches for lunch, when he glanced at Rusty, now curled up on a small rug near the back door. The cat was listless, his appetite almost non-existent. The smell of the bread took George back, 15 years or more, to a sunny spring morning. He had been making sandwiches then, too, when a tiny ginger ball of fluff had darted into the kitchen, attracted by the scent of freshly baked bread. It was Rusty, a mere 8 weeks old, a surprise gift for Sarah's 10th birthday. He remembered the kitten's audacity, his fearless attempt to climb onto the counter, his tiny paws scrabbling at the edge. George had laughed, scooping him up and offering him a tiny crumb of bread, which the kitten had devoured with surprising gusto. Now, looking at the frail, elderly cat, the contrast was heartbreaking. He offered Rusty a small piece of bread, but the cat merely sniffed it and turned away. Later that afternoon, Sarah's car pulled into the driveway, the familiar crunch of tires on gravel, a sound that usually brought Rusty to the window. Mary remembered the countless times she had watched him, as a young cat, perched on the windowsill, his tail twitching with excitement, waiting for Sarah to come home from school, from college, from her first job. He had been her shadow, her confidant, her furry companion through all the ups and downs of childhood and adolescence. He had comforted her through scraped knees, schoolyard bullies, and first heartbreaks. He had been a constant, unwavering presence in her life. Now, Sarah knelt beside Rusty, stroking his fur, her voice soft and soothing. "Hey, buddy," she whispered. "Remember when you used to chase butterflies in the garden? You were so fast, so agile." A flicker of recognition seemed to pass through Rusty's eyes. He remembered those days, the sun warm on his fur, the thrill of the chase, the scent of wildflowers and freshly cut grass. He had been a fearless hunter then, stalking imaginary prey through the tall grass, pouncing on unsuspecting insects, batting at dangling leaves. Mary joined them, her eyes moist. "He used to sleep on your bed every night, Sarah," she recalled. "Right at the foot, curled up in a little ball." Sarah nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "He'd purr so loud, it would vibrate the whole bed." These memories, these echoes of Rusty's vibrant past, were bittersweet. They were a reminder of his vitality, his joy, his deep connection to the family. But they also underscored the painful reality of his decline. He was fading, like the autumn leaves, his life force slowly ebbing away. They tried everything to tempt him to eat. Special treats, warmed-up broth, even a bit of tuna, his all-time favorite. But he barely touched anything. He was withdrawing, retreating into himself, preparing for the final journey. Despite his declining health, Rusty still clung to the familiar routines that had shaped his life for so many years. These small rituals, these anchors of habit, provided him with a sense of comfort and security in his increasingly uncertain world. His favorite spot on the worn armchair by the fireplace remained his sanctuary. The fabric was threadbare in places, molded to the shape of his body from countless hours of napping. He would curl up there, his body tucked into a tight ball, the warmth of the fireplace radiating through his fur. Mary continued her daily ritual of brushing him, even though his fur was thinning and his skin felt fragile beneath her fingers. She used a soft bristled brush, her strokes gentle and soothing. He would still purr, faintly, a whisper of his former rumble, but it was a sound that brought immense comfort to Mary. George, too, maintained his routine of scratching Rusty behind the ears, a spot that always elicited a contented sigh. He would talk to him softly, telling him stories about their life together, reminiscing about their shared adventures. Sarah's visits became even more frequent. She would sit with him, sometimes for hours, just stroking his fur and talking to him in a low, soothing voice. She brought special treats, knowing he wouldn't eat them, but hoping that the gesture itself would convey her love and concern. One afternoon, Rusty struggled to jump onto the couch, a place he used to leap onto with effortless grace. He tried several times, his legs trembling, his movements clumsy. George watched him, his heart aching with sadness. He gently lifted him up, placing him carefully on the cushion next to him. Rusty curled up close to George, his head resting on his thigh. He purred softly, a deep, resonant sound that vibrated through George's body. It was a moment of profound connection, a silent acknowledgement of their shared love and the inevitable parting that loomed ahead. They adjusted his life to suit his weakness. They placed extra blankets in his favorite spots, creating cozy nests where he could rest comfortably. They carried him outside to the garden, so he could feel the warmth of the sun on his fur and smell the familiar scents of the earth. These small acts of kindness, these gestures of love and devotion, were all they could offer him now. They couldn't stop the inevitable, but they could make his remaining days as comfortable and peaceful as possible. They were determined to cherish every moment, to savor the fading embers of his life. The storm arrived with the suddenness of a slammed door. One moment, the evening was calm, the stars twinkling in the clear autumn sky. The next, the wind was howling like a banshee, rattling the windows and sending a shiver of unease through the Miller household. Rain lashed against the glass, blurring the outside world into a swirling vortex of gray and black. Rusty, who had been sleeping fitfully in his armchair, became restless. He paced back and forth, his movements agitated, his meow a soft, plaintive sound that was barely audible above the roar of the wind. He refused to eat anything, not even the special chicken broth that Mary had prepared for him. Mary and George exchanged worried glances. They had seen him restless before, but this was different. There was a frantic quality to his movements, a sense of desperation in his eyes. "He wants to go out," Mary said, her voice trembling slightly. "I can see it in his eyes." "But it's a terrible storm out there," George replied, his brow furrowed with concern. "He's too weak. He could get hurt." They took turns staying up with him, trying to soothe him. Mary wrapped him in a soft blanket and held him close, stroking his fur and whispering comforting words. George played his favorite classical music, a gentle Mozart sonata that had always calmed him in the past. But nothing seemed to work. Rusty continued to pace, his meows growing more insistent. He kept looking towards the back door, as if drawn by some irresistible force. The power flickered several times, plunging the house into momentary darkness, adding to the sense of unease. The wind howled even louder, shaking the old house to its foundations. The branches of the ancient oak tree in the backyard scraped against the roof, creating an eerie, scratching sound. The storm seemed to mirror the internal turmoil of the Millers, their growing fear that the end was near. They knew Rusty was slipping away, and the violence of the storm amplified their sense of helplessness. They felt as though they were caught in a maelstrom, tossed and turned by forces beyond their control. Mary, her eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep and worry, tried to coax Rusty to drink some water. He lapped at it weakly, his tongue barely touching the surface. His breathing was shallow and labored, his body trembling with exhaustion. "He's so frail," she whispered to George, her voice choked with emotion. "I don't know how much longer he can hold on." George put his arm around her, drawing her close. He didn't have any words of comfort to offer. He felt the same despair, the same crushing weight of impending loss. They were facing the inevitable, the final farewell to their beloved companion. As the night wore on, the storm gradually began to subside. The wind died down, the rain softened to a drizzle, and the first faint streaks of dawn appeared on the horizon. Rusty, exhausted from his restlessness, finally settled down in Mary's lap. He curled up into a tight ball, his head tucked under his paws. His breathing was still shallow, but his body had stopped trembling. Mary stroked his fur gently, her tears falling silently onto his head. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that this might be the last time she held him. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 6 times, the sound echoing through the quiet house. The storm had passed, leaving behind a trail of destruction and a lingering sense of sadness. But for the Millers, the real storm was just beginning. Mary woke with a start. The room was bathed in the soft, golden light of early morning. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world washed clean and sparkling with dew. But the beauty of the morning was lost on Mary. A sense of dread, cold and heavy, settled in the pit of her stomach. She reached out her hand to the spot beside her on the bed, the place where Rusty usually slept. It was empty and cold. Panic surged through her. She sat up, her heart pounding in her chest. "Rusty?" she called out, her voice hoarse and trembling. There was no answer. She scrambled out of bed, her bare feet hitting the cold wooden floor. She searched the bedroom, checking under the bed, behind the curtains, in the closet. He wasn't there. She rushed into the hallway, calling his name again, her voice rising in pitch. "Rusty, where are you?" George emerged from his study, his face etched with concern. "What's wrong?" "He's gone," Mary said, her voice choked with tears. "Rusty's gone." The blood drained from George's face. He knew instantly what this meant. He had seen the look in Rusty's eyes the night before, the restless yearning, the silent farewell. They searched the house together, their movements frantic, their calls growing more desperate. They checked every room, every nook and cranny, every possible hiding place. The living room, the kitchen, the basement, the attic. The worn armchair by the fireplace, Rusty's favorite spot, was empty. The small rug near the back door where he often napped was bare. The silence of the house was deafening, broken only by their increasingly frantic calls and the pounding of their own hearts. Mary noticed the back door was slightly ajar. A sliver of cold air seeped into the house. Her heart sank. He must have slipped out during the night while they were sleeping. "He's outside," she said, her voice barely a whisper. He went outside. The realization hit them like a physical blow. Rusty, in his weakened state, had ventured out into the cold, damp morning. He was vulnerable, exposed, and alone. George grabbed his coat and rushed out the back door, Mary close behind him. They stood on the porch, scanning the yard, their eyes searching desperately for any sign of their beloved cat. The yard was littered with fallen leaves and branches, remnants of the previous night's storm. The grass was wet with dew, the air crisp and cold. The world seemed to hold its breath, waiting. Sarah arrived a few minutes later, alerted by a frantic phone call from her mother. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with alarm. "He's gone?" she asked, her voice trembling. Mary nodded, unable to speak. The tears streamed down her face, mingling with the cold morning air. The three of them stood there, united in their grief and fear, the empty spot where Rusty should have been a gaping hole in their lives. The search was about to begin, but deep down they knew what they would likely find. The search began with a desperate urgency. They called out Rusty's name, their voices hoarse and cracking with emotion, echoing through the quiet neighborhood. They walked up and down the street, peering into bushes, under cars, behind fences. "Rusty! Rusty! Where are you?" Mary called, her voice breaking. "Come home, baby. Please come home." George, his face grim and determined, checked the neighboring yards, asking if anyone had seen a ginger cat. He showed them a picture of Rusty, a faded snapshot from happier times, when he was still young and vibrant. Sarah, her eyes red and swollen from crying, systematically searched the park across the street, a place Rusty had loved to explore in his younger days. She called his name until her voice was raw, her throat aching. They put up "Lost Cat" posters, hastily printed with Rusty's picture and their contact information. They stapled them to telephone poles, taped them to shop windows, handed them out to passers-by. Even though they knew, deep down, that it might be futile, they clung to the faint hope that someone might have seen him, that he might still be alive. The search was physically and emotionally exhausting. They walked for miles, their legs aching, their bodies weary. The cold air nipped at their faces, their fingers and toes numb with cold. But the physical discomfort was nothing compared to the emotional pain, the gnawing fear that they would never see Rusty again. They revisited places that had held special significance for Rusty. The old oak tree in the park where he used to climb and sharpen his claws. The sunny patch of grass by the creek, where he loved to bask in the warmth of the sun. The neighbor's garden, where he used to chase butterflies and stalk unsuspecting birds. Each familiar place brought back a flood of memories, intensifying their grief. They remembered his playful antics, his gentle purr, his unwavering companionship. They remembered the joy he had brought into their lives, the unconditional love he had given them. As the day wore on, the hope began to dwindle. The sun began to set, casting long shadows across the landscape. The temperature dropped, and a chill wind began to blow. They knew that Rusty, in his weakened state, wouldn't be able to survive another night outside. They had to find him, and they had to find him soon. Sarah, her voice hoarse and trembling, suggested they check the local animal shelter. It was a long shot, but it was worth a try. George stayed behind, continuing the search in the immediate neighborhood. He felt a strange pull, a gut feeling that he couldn't ignore, drawing him back to their own property. George, driven by an instinct he couldn't explain, found himself walking towards the back of their property, to a small, overgrown area that had been largely neglected over the years. It was a wild, untamed corner of their yard, filled with tangled bushes, weeds, and fallen branches. As a younger cat, Rusty had loved to explore this area, disappearing for hours into the dense undergrowth. It was his secret kingdom, his private hunting ground. But in recent years, as his mobility declined, he had avoided it. George pushed his way through the thicket, branches scratching at his face and arms. He called out Rusty's name one last time, his voice choked with emotion. "Rusty? Rusty, are you here?" There was a silence, broken only by the rustling of leaves in the wind. He reached a small clearing, dominated by an old willow tree. Its gnarled roots, twisted and exposed, created a network of small, hidden hollows beneath the trunk. The ground was covered in a thick layer of fallen leaves, damp and decaying. Something caught his eye, a glimpse of ginger fur, partially obscured by the leaves. His heart leaped into his throat. He knelt down, his hands trembling, and gently pulled away the leaves. There, curled up in a small, sheltered hollow beneath the willow's roots, lay Rusty. He was still, his body limp, his eyes closed. He looked as if he were asleep, peacefully dreaming. But he was cold, and he wasn't breathing. George let out a cry, a primal sound of grief and despair that echoed through the quiet evening. He reached out and touched Rusty's fur, his fingers tracing the familiar contours of his body. He was gone. Mary and Sarah, hearing his cry, came running. They saw the look on his face, the tears streaming down his cheeks, and they knew. They knelt beside him, their own tears mingling with his. They reached out and touched Rusty, their fingers stroking his soft fur one last time. "Oh, Rusty," Mary sobbed, her body shaking with grief. "My sweet, sweet boy." Sarah wrapped her arms around her mother, her own tears falling silently onto Rusty's still body. They stayed there for a long time, huddled together in the gathering darkness, their shared grief a tangible presence. They held each other, weeping, their hearts broken by the loss of their beloved companion. They carefully carried Rusty back to the house, wrapped in his favorite blanket, the one he had slept on for so many years. They laid him gently on the kitchen table, his body still warm from their embrace. They decided to bury him in the garden, under the old apple tree where he used to nap in the sun. It was a peaceful spot, filled with the scents of flowers and the buzzing of bees. It was a place he had loved. The next morning, under a sky the color of faded denim, they dug a small grave. They lined it with soft cloths and placed Rusty gently inside, surrounded by his favorite toys. A worn-out catnip mouse, a feathered wand, a small, tattered ball of yarn. They stood around the grave, their arms around each other, sharing memories of Rusty. They talked about his playful kittenhood, his mischievous antics, his gentle nature, his unwavering loyalty. They laughed and they cried, their tears mingling with the soft earth. As they filled in the grave, the first autumn leaves began to fall from the apple tree, swirling down like golden tears. They covered Rusty's resting place, a blanket of color and remembrance. The final scene showed them gathered around his grave, a simple wooden cross marking the spot. The sun was setting, casting a warm, golden glow over the garden. A sense of peace settled over them, despite their sadness. They knew they had given Rusty a good life, a life filled with love and companionship. And they knew that he was no longer suffering. He had found his final resting place, close to home, surrounded by the things he loved. He was gone, but he would never be forgotten. The falling leaves represented his passing, a reminder that all things, eventually, come to an end, but that love endures. They found comfort in the fact he hadn't ended up somewhere foreign and scary, but rather a familiar place, surrounded by home comforts. The days and weeks that followed were a blur of grief and adjustment. The house felt eerily empty without Rusty's presence. The silence was profound, no longer punctuated by his soft meows, his gentle purrs, or the rhythmic tapping of his paws on the hardwood floors. Mary found herself reaching for his food bowl at mealtimes, a habit ingrained over 17 years. George would instinctively look for him on the armchair by the fireplace, expecting to see him curled up in his usual spot. Sarah missed his comforting presence at the foot of her bed during her weekend visits, the familiar weight of his body a source of solace. They kept his favorite toys, unable to part with them. The worn-out catnip mouse, the feathered wand, the tattered ball of yarn. These small objects were tangible reminders of his life, imbued with his essence. They placed them on a shelf in the living room, a small shrine to their beloved companion. They often found themselves talking about him, sharing memories, reminiscing about his quirks and his endearing habits. They laughed through their tears, remembering his playful antics, his mischievous streak, his unwavering affection. One evening, as Mary was preparing dinner, she found herself reaching for a can of tuna, Rusty's all-time favorite treat. She stopped, her hand hovering in midair, the reality of his absence hitting her with renewed force. She turned to George, her eyes filled with tears. "I still can't believe he's gone," she said, her voice choked with emotion. George put his arm around her, drawing her close. "I know," he said softly. "It's like a part of us is missing." They found comfort in each other's presence, their shared grief a bond that strengthened their relationship. They had weathered many storms together over the years, but this was different. This was the loss of a member of their family, a creature who had brought them immeasurable joy and unconditional love. Sarah visited even more frequently, her presence a balm to their wounded hearts. She brought them flowers from her garden, cooked their favorite meals, and spent hours listening to their stories about Rusty. One sunny afternoon, they sat together in the garden, near Rusty's grave under the old apple tree. The leaves had mostly fallen, carpeting the ground in a mosaic of red, gold, and brown. A gentle breeze rustled through the branches, creating a soothing, whispering sound. "He loved this spot," Mary said, her voice soft and wistful. "He used to spend hours here, napping in the sun. Remember how he used to chase butterflies?" Sarah said, a small smile touching her lips. "He was so clumsy he rarely caught any, but he never gave up." George chuckled. "And he'd always bring us his presents," he recalled. "Dead leaves, twigs, the occasional unfortunate insect." They fell silent, each lost in their own memories. The grief was still raw, the pain still sharp, but it was tempered by a sense of gratitude. They were grateful for the 17 years they had shared with Rusty, for the joy he had brought into their lives, for the unconditional love he had given them. As the seasons changed, the garden transformed. The vibrant colors of autumn gave way to the stark beauty of winter. Snow covered Rusty's grave, a blanket of white silence. Spring arrived, bringing with it new life, new growth, new hope. The apple tree blossomed, its branches covered in delicate pink and white flowers. The Millers began to heal. The sharp edges of their grief softened, replaced by a gentle ache of remembrance. They would never forget Rusty, but they learned to live with his absence. They found comfort in the knowledge that he had lived a long and happy life, surrounded by love and care. One evening, as they were sitting on the porch, watching the sunset, a stray ginger cat wandered into their yard. It was young, skinny, and a little timid. It looked at them with wary eyes, its tail twitching nervously. Mary's heart skipped a beat. For a moment, she thought it was Rusty, returned to them in some miraculous way. But she quickly realized it wasn't him. This cat was different, younger, smaller. But there was something about its eyes, a familiar spark of curiosity and intelligence, that reminded her of Rusty. George smiled. "Well, hello there," he said softly, extending his hand towards the cat. The cat hesitated for a moment, then cautiously approached, sniffing George's outstretched fingers. It allowed him to stroke its head, a faint purr rumbling in its chest. Mary and Sarah joined them, their hearts filled with a mixture of sadness and hope. They knew this wasn't Rusty, and they would never replace him. But perhaps, just perhaps, they could offer this stray cat a home, a safe haven, a place to belong. Perhaps, in caring for this new creature, they could honor Rusty's memory and keep his spirit alive in their hearts. The cycle of life, of loss and renewal continued, and the Millers, though forever marked by the loss of their beloved Rusty, were ready to open their hearts to love again. The falling autumn leaves, which had once symbolized the end of Rusty's life, now represented the enduring cycle of nature and the possibility of new beginnings. While they would always miss Rusty, the found, in the potential to give another cat a good home, the found solace that Rusty would have.